I have 1 o'clock. I'm going to get us started. This is Ed Crow. Thanks for joining me today. Really appreciate it for coming on. Today's topic, we're talking about Medicare with employer coverage. But before we do that, we're going to a couple quick things. We do record these webinars, so we usually do these on Wednesdays and Thursdays at 1 o'clock. Sometimes we'll only do a Wednesday or Thursday, but a lot of weeks I try to do two of them, one Wednesday and Thursday. Nonetheless, we record all of them, so if you, for a future webinar, if you can't attend but you want the webinar, just register and we will send you the recording. Also, if you have questions along the way here, I'm not smart enough to kind of run the webinar and look at the questions at the same time, but if you have questions, just please send them in during the webinar if you could, and I will answer them when we're done. I do stay on for a minute or two at the end in case you don't have your question until the end, but if you think about it while we're going along, send it in, and then I'll get to it when we're done. Other than that, I think we'll get started, and going to talk about this webinar. I found a little challenging because there's a lot of directions you can go with this. It's kind of a vague or broad topic, I should say, but try to kind of go with what the questions we get and what's applicable in most situations. So we'll talk about valid waivers for Medicare Part B. That goes kind of hand in hand with Medicare and employer coverage. Rules and penalties. Employers of under 20 employees versus employers of over 20. That's important. Applying for delayed Part B, because that comes around, is usually something you need to work with your clients and prospects on. Talk about the actual coordination of the benefits, a resource you can use for specific answers, which is you'll see they're not easy to get actually. And then just doing the math to figure out the best options for somebody who, if they're over 65 and working and trying to decide, am I going to stay on my work plan or am I going to come off and go on, sign up for Medicare Part B and go with the Medicare plan? Before we get into it, I just want to I try to usually remember to do a quick reminder on some of the programs we offer. We've added a couple new ones, and I'll make it this quick. It's just making you aware of programs out there. If you work with us, you have access to this stuff. Definitely, we have a lot of programs that I think some of them are really valuable, and people aren't using them just because maybe they didn't just didn't notice them, or maybe they didn't have time. But regardless, so we have our lead program. That's $500 per agent per month to help with your costs for anything Medicare related for selling. So advertising, leads, promotions, anything that generates Medicare sales really. Seminars, anything it might be. Program super flexible. You can spend money, do leads, advertising with any company you want to generate those leads, and it's just a reimbursement process by us, so it has a lot of flexibility. Our T65 seminar program is really our hottest program right now. That's averaging about 70 attendees per seminar. They are all turning 65, or the majority of them are, and we can do these nationwide. It's a turnkey program, and we have everything you need to do this, from the presentation to all the best practices. We run a lot of these throughout the country, so it's something that we certainly can talk to you about if you have an interest in presenting to T65 candidates. So that's a great program. We do have a new a new carrier rather, I should say, and they offer hospital indemnity, cancer, critical illness, and accident plans. That in and of itself isn't all that unique, but what is they're approved in all 50 states, including New York. So it's all in one platform, all 50 states, including New York. The street commission that we start people off at on this is 70%, which is fairly, I think, pretty competitive. We can go higher for agency-level contracts. So the fact that they're all on one platform and approved in all 50 states, I thought it was worth mentioning it. We just sent it out a couple days ago, and we can give you access to it. And you are paid direct by the carrier as well. We have Connector, Sunfire, and Medicare Bot. It's basically all three of the national enrollment platforms. Medicare Bot's voice enrollment, Connector, and Sunfire right now are text and email enrollment for all the carriers on one platform. You have access to all three with us at no cost. We work with agents and agencies often. In fact, I've got one on next Monday that I'm going to work with to help with their SEO. In other words, their Google search. I can teach you how to do that and work with you, and we can do it at no cost. not using an advertising company. It's not a paid service we offer. It's just me working with you, showing you how we built the SEO for Crow & Associates up. So if you Google a bunch of random things, we come up for a bunch, first result on Google. And I enjoy talking about it, and I'm happy to talk to agents or agencies about that. And then lastly is Best Plan Pro. It's for final expense. If you haven't checked it out, you should. Long story short, it's like the FEX quoter or anything else. It'll quote and compare plans, but it also will very specifically let you put in medications or health conditions. And when you quote those plans, it will show you what each carrier would offer, be it level, graded, guaranteed issue only. It'll do it so you don't have to pull any underwriting guides or look at apps. Huge time saver. I wish I had that when I was writing final expense insurance. Anyway, that's enough of that. Let's get started here on the Medicare with employer coverage. Okay, so we'll start off with who can waive Part B. There's a lot of, especially on the prospect side, you get a lot of people who do the wrong thing here, so it's important. So you have a valid waiver when you're age 65 or older. You have who has a valid waiver for Part B. So there's three components. First of all, you have to work for an employer that has 20 or more employees. That in the past wasn't important. It is now. I'm going to talk more on that later. But that's the first thing. So the employer's got to be more than 20. That's something that we didn't care about a few years ago, but you certainly should for your client now. You must be actively working or getting coverage through an actively working spouse. And also important is that coverage must be through the employer of the actively working person or the actively working spouse. Get a lot of times where somebody's a group of 20 or more, they're actively working or their spouse is getting coverage through their actively working spouse, but the coverage they have is with an old employer or a union plan or an individual health plan. That doesn't count. It's not an active waiver, so it's got to be all three things to waive Part B without penalty in the future. 20 or more, actively working, coverage through the employer. All three have to be in place to waive Part B. At any time when those three things aren't in place, your person needs to sign up for Part B immediately, or very quickly, I should say. One of the big areas where mistakes are made. COBRA is not a valid waiver for Part B. Happens a lot too. The reason it isn't is because if you're on COBRA, you're not actively working. Or if you're getting COBRA through your spouse, they're not actively working. So it's not a valid waiver. COBRA does not count. Somebody who goes on COBRA needs B if they're 65 or older. And also, this is a big surprising one to people sometimes. VA is not a valid waiver for B. People think that a lot. It's a waiver for D, as in David, drug, Part D. It's a waiver for that, but not for B. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're actively working but have coverage through a different employer, so whether your spouse is getting coverage through you or you're getting coverage on your own, it's got to be through the employer you're working for. We've had that come up more than you'd think. They have, like I said, coverage through a union or through an individual plan. That doesn't count as a waiver. And as I mentioned earlier, COBRA and VA and individual insurance is not a waiver for B, but it is a valid waiver for Part D. So that's a big distinction there that you got to remember. So if you screw up on your B and you didn't enroll in it when you should have, what's the penalty? So it's 10% of the B premium, so 170.10. 10% of the B premium for every full 12-month period you didn't have it. So if you went 3 years, you have a 30% penalty. If you went 6 years, it's 60%, and it does not go away. When you have a penalty and you enroll in B, it's there to stay unless you qualify for drug help or Medicaid. So it doesn't end. So what happens if somebody has a valid waiver rather for Part B? They're actively working and they lose employment or coverage through the employer. They have an eight-month period to enroll in B. Now, should they wait the 8 months? No. I mean, if they lose coverage through their employer, they're going to want to sign up for B as quick as possible so they can go on Medicare. But they do that enrollment period, that special election is 8 months. So they have 8 months to enroll in B, however they'd want to do it, for coverage purposes immediately. They can apply then for Medicare the first of the month after they lose coverage. So I'm working, it's the month of June, I get fired or lose my job, or my employer is ending my health coverage and it's going to end at the end of June. I can go right then, I can apply for Medicare Part B, delayed Part B enrollment, and I can get Part B. If I met all those three criteria, I can get Part B for the first of the month, the next month. We used to tell people to apply online and we would email them the link, and I know a lot of people that do that. And it's a specific link for delayed B enrollment. It's not the standard link for Medicare A and B enrollment. It's a specific link for delayed B. However, that has been getting screwed up a lot lately. Not really the person applying's fault, just Medicare in general, Social Security, I should say, have been screwing those enrollments up a lot. So what we've been telling people and agents to tell people is if their local Social Security office is open, call them first and go down. That's usually a better option to get your B enrollment. And just quick aside, general rule, and most of you probably know this, but kind of off topic a little bit, but if somebody, when they turn 65, if they're drawing Social Security payments, they're auto-enrolled in Medicare A and B. If when they turn 65, they're not drawing Social Security payments, then they have to manually enroll, and they can do that online easily. There's a link to do that. It's a pretty easy process. But when you're doing a delayed B, maybe you're 67, 68, lose employment or lose coverage, and you need to do a delayed Part B enrollment, that's a separate link you should do it through. But again, we recommend going down to the office if you can. When you go to the Social Security office, or if you do it online for that matter, you're definitely going to need the employment verification form. So that is the form that proves to Medicare, Social Security, that you have a valid reason to enroll in B. Because after you're 65, you can't just enroll in B when you feel like it. You need to have a special election to do so. And the employment verification form is a form from the employer, CMS L564. It's a form that the employer fills out. Most big HR departments will already have it, but they fill it out showing that you've been actively working and that you've had coverage. And that form is needed at the Social Security office or for online enrollment to prove, yeah, I have a special election to enroll in B, and here's my form to prove it. You also need, this is kind of an afterthought, but you need the B enrollment form as well, which the Social Security office will have. So that's really, and when you do it online, it takes the place of that form, really. But there is a B enrollment form just to enroll in B, and that's CMS 40B. Again, it just as a form, the employment verification form is a form to prove that I've got a special election, a special reason to apply for B outside of what's called the Medicare Part B general election period. And again, it's a complicated topic. If you have questions, please just send them in. I'm going to try to answer them rather at the end. So what if the person didn't have a valid reason to waive B? So they didn't have a valid waiver, and then lo and behold, they're 67 years old and they want Part B, and it's June, and they feel like getting Part B. Well, without a special election, without that employment verification form, they can't just enroll in B when they want. They're going to have to apply through the Medicare General Enrollment period for Part B, and that period runs every year from January 1st to March 31st for a July 1 start. So get that person in May who suddenly lost coverage. They didn't have they didn't have the criteria to validly waive B. They lost coverage, and it's the month of May. They're going to have to wait until January to apply, and they're not going to get it until July of the following year. So it can create a big problem for people when they're delaying B without a valid reason to do so. Kind of leads us into enrolling in an MA plan due to delayed B enrollment. This one people confuse a lot. I do myself sometimes. The MA election for delayed B is the ISEP, and unlike turning 65, where you have the 3 months before, the month of, and the 3 months after, when you're a delayed B enrollment using the ISEP, you've got to enroll in the 3-month period before the B effective date. So, you don't have the 3 months, the month of, or the 3 months after. If I'm 68 years old, I just got Part B for August 1st. My application's got to be in prior to August 1st. So it's not the standard enrollment period. Uh, so it's different than the IEP or ISEP when you're turning 65, which runs 7 months. It's just something to keep in mind. I tend to forget myself, but it's not a pleasant situation if you try to put somebody's app in the month, in the month that they finally got delayed Part B. So PDP and delayed B, another tricky area sometimes. We tend to forget, but if somebody's a delayed B, they enroll in Part B later on. You might think, okay, that's an election period for a PDP. It is not. You don't keep in mind you don't need Part B for a standalone drug plan. You only need Medicare Part A. So that person who waived B and then they add B, a couple years later when they're 68, that's not an election period for a PDP. Having A is all you need for a PDP. Coordination of coverage with the group plan. So this comes down to the size of the employer. So employers under 20 employees, keep in mind Medicare is primary. So if you're going to coordinate coverage, work for an employer under 20, Medicare is primary. If it's 20 or more, then the group plan is going to be the primary insurance and Medicare will be secondary. That's going to be important for this conversation. So group size is under 20. Medicare is going to be primary for people 65 or older. And the group plan is going to pay after Medicare pays. So you have a person who's working and getting work coverage. They're working for a group less than 20. In the past, what we would say to them is, hey, if you're actively working and getting coverage through work, even though you're working for an employer of 6 employees, go ahead and waive Part B because you're meeting the criteria, working and coverage through work. And it's always been a rule that if you're with a group under 20, even if you're actively working, getting coverage through work, once you turn 65, it's always been a rule that you need B. It's just never been enforced. The carriers have ignored it. Well, they aren't anymore. So what they're doing now is they're starting to deny claims for people in groups of less than 20 who don't get B. So just to give you an example of that, I'm 66. I'm actively working, getting coverage through my work. My employer is 10 employees. In the past, I would have just waived B. I wouldn't take it because I've got coverage through work, and I'd be fine. But remember, for a group of under 20, Medicare is primary. So what the carriers are doing now is saying, well, you're actively working and getting coverage through work, but you should have Medicare as your primary. And since you don't, we're denying the portion of the claim that Medicare would have covered had Part B been in place. So they're calling people out on it now. So it changes how we have to advise people. And we got to, really go by the book now because of that, because it can create a really bad situation for us as the agent. So we got to add that to the criteria. And it stinks for the person who it's applicable to, but there's not much you can do about it. So if they're a group of 10, employer of 10 employees, actively working, coverage through work, they still need to buy Part B, even though they meet the other 2 criteria. It's not safe anymore to tell them to ignore it. What about a group size of 20 or more? So with a group of 20 or more, the group plan is the primary insurance. Medicare is secondary. With that situation, Medicare will cover costs secondarily as the second payer, costs not covered by the group plan. However, they won't cover all of the costs. And how much of the cost will they pay as a secondary? Well, that's a really interesting question. And I challenge you to go and try to find a specific schedule that shows it. It's very difficult to find. So it's a hard question to answer. If somebody says to you, well, I'm going to have my group plan primary, I think I'm going to get Medicare as a secondary. I'm 66 and I know I'm working. I know I can waive B, but I'm going to take B and have Medicare as a secondary. Is it worth it? Well, trying to find how much of that leftover cost Medicare will cover is very tricky. And what I would say is, because there's not a very good source for us to access for it, I would recommend they call the Benefit Coordination and Recovery Center. That's a company that's employed by CMS that they can call that will case specific talk to them about how much would be covered by Medicare as a secondary. Because like I said, finding a schedule for that is next to impossible. If somebody has a good one, please send it to me. I'd be very thankful for it. You can find tons of explanations of how Medicare works as a secondary, but what they actually cover, a lot more difficult to find in writing. I'm sure I'll have some questions on that, and like I said, I'll answer those in just a few minutes. So we talk about HSA contributions in Medicare. The rule is you can't contribute to an HSA account when you have Medicare A and or B. So the reason for that is because for able to have an authorized contribution to an HSA, you've got to have a high deductible health plan. But if you have Medicare A and or B, that's not considered a high deductible health plan. So contributions to an HSA when you have either in place is not an allowed contribution, and the penalty by the IRS, and they will catch it. The penalty by the IRS for that is you have to pay the back taxes because HSA contributions go in pre-tax, so you got to pay the tax back plus 10%. So again, one of those things that can create a bad situation for us is the agent. Now the language is interesting. It always says you should stop contributing to an HSA 6 months before enrolling in Medicare. And I always thought that was weird, like why 6 months before? And if you really think about it, the reason they say that is because when people have delayed enrollment, so maybe most situations we get people have Medicare A when they're over 65. So if they're actively working, coverage through work, a lot of people will have waive B, but they have A in place. But the reason they say that is because if you don't have A or B and you do a delayed B enrollment, they're going to enroll you in A and B, but they're going to retro that A back up to 6 months. So B will coordinate with the loss of coverage date or the loss of employment date. But A, they'll retro that back a ways. So the reason they tell you that 6 months is so, if you made an HSA contribution 3 months ago, but now you're applying for Medicare, and Medicare retros that Part A effective date, it's going to screw you over on the HSA contribution. I'm sure the question will come up, can you use HSA money that's already been contributed in the account when you're in Medicare? And the answer is yes, you can. You just can't contribute to it. So then again, the question of, okay, should I stay on the group plan while working or should I take Medicare? And it all depends on the math. It's just a math equation. So you really have to look at the group plan, the premiums and the benefits of the group plan, and you have to compare that to the premium of Medicare Part B. And if they go with a supplement and drug plan, so you'd have your Part B premium, your supplement premium, your drug plan premium. Or if they're going Advantage, you'd have your Part B premium versus the benefits of the Advantage plan, assuming they're on a zero premium Advantage plan. One thing to really be aware of with this situation is when you do this, comparison for them, is are they going to have an IRMA? Because a lot of times if people are working, maybe they might be subject to an IRMA. So you might be doing math based on a Part B of 170, but lo and behold, the person has a huge IRMA and it blows that math all up. So you really got to check to, see what their income was 2 years ago to see if they're going to have an IRMA when they're making this comparison. So if they're with a group of under 20, they're 66 years old, and they're asking you, should I apply for Medicare Part B and get Medicare, or should I stay in my group plan? There's really no choice for them because they're a group of under 20. Even if they stay in the group plan, they need Medicare Part B regardless, even if they're actively working and have coverage through work. So that kind of takes the guesswork out of it there for you. If they're working for an employer of under 20, actively working coverage through work, then they have a choice. And again, that's where you do the math. Okay, let's look at if you go on B with a supplement and drug plan or B with an Advantage plan, how's that cost compare to your premium you're paying for your work plan and the benefits you get? Pretty straightforward. What I can tell you is it usually, not always, but it usually doesn't make sense. If they have a valid waiver for B, and they're actively working, coverage through work, more than 20 employees, it usually doesn't make sense for them to have both in that case. So, meaning, I'm going to stay on the group plan, keep paying for that, and I'm going to enroll in Medicare Part B for the secondary coverage of it. My experience, and again, without being able to look at a specific fee schedule of what Medicare covers as a secondary, my experience is the math doesn't usually make sense to do both. It's usually a one or the other scenario. Actually, that went a little quicker than I had anticipated. Let me look and see if I have questions. I do have some questions. Actually, I have a whole bunch of them, so here we go. Will we be able to get slides? Or let me try that again. Will we be able to get copies of these slides afterward? Yes. Yes, you can. Just call our office. I'm going to send you out the recording of this webinar, but if you call the office, we'd be happy just to send you the presentation itself. Next person said, I mentioned the $500 towards Medicare marketing and 50/50 after up to 500. Do you do something similar in any fashion for final expense? No. Our lead program, the $500 lead program, is just for Medicare. We do not do it for final expense, IULs, or anything else. Okay, next question. If a person is collecting Social Security and working full-time for a large employer with medical benefits, you said they would be auto-enrolled in Part B. Is there a way to stop that enrollment? Yes. So it's good question. So you got a person, they're drawing Social Security at the time they turn 65, but they're working for an employer, and they've got a plan through the employer. So the drawing Social Security is going to auto-enroll them. You can log into your My Social Security account and decline A and B before you turn 65, because if you wait till you're 65, they're just going to send it to you. Once it's sent to you, when they send you the information, you can sign off on that and say you're deferring, you're electing not to take A and B. But it's easier to either call Social Security or go into your My Social Security account and decline it before you turn 65 in that scenario. Good question. Please review again what to advise the administrator to tell the employees under 20 employees regarding the employees Part B. Yeah, so if an employer group is if an employer, I should say, is less than 20 employees, the person who turns 65, even if they're still actively working and getting coverage through work, they still need to sign up for Part B. Medicare is going to be primary. In the past, the carriers just ignored it and would pay their claims, even if they didn't have B or A for that matter. They are not anymore. So that person who turns 65, they're going to stay on work coverage, but it's a group of less than 20. They don't want to pay for B, so they don't enroll in it. The carriers just pay those claims like normal. They're not anymore. Most carriers now are saying, oops, you should have had, you're less than 20, your group, you should have had A and B in place. We're not paying the portion of the claim that Medicare should have paid. Hopefully that clears it up for you. So somebody said, so they are not automatically enrolling folks without Social Security? No. Nope. And that question came up before. They are not. Somebody said also need to, let's see. A lot of questions today, so this is good. What was my next question? Somebody said also need to take into account RX costs when comparing versus employer coverage. Yeah, of course. Your employer plan does not have a donut hole in most cases. A Medicare plan does. So certainly that's a valid point of something you need to look into. If employee is 60 years old, okay, let me look at this question. Let me grab this. So this question is, if employee is 60 years old with employer HSA and spouse is 65, will this be a problem for the spouse? It depends. It depends on how much is being contributed to that HSA. If they're doing a contribution for both the employee and the spouse, then it will be. If they're doing up to the single max contribution, then it wouldn't be. Let's see what else we have. More questions here. So let's see. All right. So, okay. So this one says, you mentioned the health insurance companies are beginning to deny claims. Many insurance companies at lower support levels are telling 65 or older employers they are fine on a small group plan. Do you have an article about increasing denials to help warn them? What do you say in those circumstances? I've never really looked for an article. I'm doing it based off experience with myself and the agents I work with. 5 years ago, I never once heard of an employee getting a claim denied. But it happens all the time now. So I'm really just doing that based on experience. I've never looked for an article, but I'm sure they're out there, and I could certainly look, or we could, search for one. But that comment I'm making is just based off my real life experience and us starting to hear a lot about that. When we never did in the past. And I've talked to the carriers about it too, and they've said, yeah, we're starting to enforce that. There's some specific ones too. Do the rules also apply to federal retirees? Do you recommend federal retirees enroll in Medicare Part B? It's a really good question. So if you're a federal employee and you have benefits, I guess the answer to that question is, how confident are you with those benefits, those federal benefits? If you think those federal benefits are going to stay solid, where you pay very little for them and it's great coverage, and you're never going to need to enroll in Part B as a result, then no problem. Because if you never have to enroll in Part B, you'll never take a penalty, as long as you feel confident those benefits will stay strong. If those federal benefits somehow, I know in some cases they're collectively bargained, but if those federal benefits become less favorable and you decide you'd be better off on Medicare, then that's where you're going to be stuck because you weren't validly waiving Part B. So I guess it depends on the future of those benefits. So it's hard for me to answer that part. I mean, the safe answer there is to say, yeah, enroll in B. But, I guess it depends on what those benefits. If they're guaranteed in some manner for life for those people, then they probably don't need B. Enrolling someone in an MAPD plan with a late enrollment effective 7/1/2022. Do you use an ISEP for the election? Yes. Yes. That is an ISEP. All right, husband's turning 70, covered under wife's large group plan. So I got to think about that for a minute. So turning 70, covered under wife's large group plan. She is going off group coverage this October. He has no existing Medicare. Is there a problem? No. So if this is a large group plan, wife was actively working, getting coverage through work, and the husband is getting coverage through her. So he hasn't been working, but she has, and he's getting coverage through her. And that coverage is going to end because she's coming off in October. Not a problem. He would get an employment verification letter from the employer showing that he was on his spouse's coverage. She's been actively working. He would use that to use a special election to enroll in Part B. Be all set. Should be able to get Part B for October and enroll in a plan. Let's see. Got a couple more here, guys. A couple more questions. Please distinguish between HSA contributions by employee and employer. Either one can make them if you're on Medicare. It's going into your HSA account. I have a client who has VA coverage, is working for an employer under 20 people, is turning 65 in a few months. Does he need to sign up for Part B? Yeah, VA is not. Even if this was an employer over 20. Just the fact of having VA is not a valid waiver for Part B. So leave VA out of it for a minute. The fact that this person works for an employer under 20, yeah, when he turns 65, he needs B. Even if he's still going to be actively working, getting coverage through work, he should get Part B. But having the VA doesn't help at all. Is a valid waiver for Part B. Under 20, keep an employer insurance. Good to pick up an MAPD for zero cost. So let me think. The person's with a group under 20 employees. They're going to keep the employer insurance. Yeah, I mean, if they're going to go on Medicare, they're going to have to go on B anyway. So yeah, it probably would make a lot of sense in that scenario to put them on a zero premium plan. I mean, because really, you could either leave them on straight B, A and B, or they could pick up a zero premium MAPD for the extra benefits because you really wouldn't. It'd be a tough sell to have them buy a supplement in that scenario. So yeah, I think that makes sense to go with the MAPD plan. All right, next question. Do you recommend folks not on Social Security and covered by employer insurance over 20 still enroll in Part A when turning 65? So do you recommend people not on Social Security, covered by employer insurance over 20, still enroll in Part A when turning 65? Yeah, I mean, Part A costs nothing. So unless they're contributing to an HSA, they might as well enroll in A. If they're making an HSA contribution, obviously they wouldn't want to, but otherwise, yeah, I think it would make sense to enroll in A. Do you need to sign up for Part A? No, I mean, you don't have to. I see what you're saying. Do you need to sign up for Part A if you're drawing Social Security? No, if you're drawing Social Security, they'll enroll you in A and B. If you're not drawing Social Security, they will not auto-enroll you. Hopefully that answers your question. Oh, what else we have here? Can HSA account funds pay for either supplement or MAPD premiums? Uh, I don't know the answer to that. I do know the answer, and I just don't want to be wrong. I don't recall, to be quite honest, and I should know that, so I apologize for not knowing that one. See what else I got for questions. Just a couple more here, and then I think we'll be done. So let's see. Employer under 20 waived Part B when turning age 65. Discovered the error. Will CMS LR64 form work for that one to avoid the penalty? No. If they're let me say this different. If it's an employer under 20, but they're actively working and getting coverage through work, they are then a delayed Part B. So to enroll in Part B, they would need to use a special election because they missed their IEP for B. So if they stop working or stop getting coverage through work, then they could enroll in Part B, but otherwise they'd have to wait for the general enrollment period for B if they miss their IEP when they turn 65. Okay, and I think we got one more here. Question is, let's see. I have a number of people who are older than 65, still working, have coverage through a large company, and need to sign up for Part B. In my recent experience, it takes anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks for Social Security to sign them up for Part B. Is there a way to streamline that? The online enrollment is quicker. The online enrollment is quicker. The issue a lot of times is them getting their Medicare ID. And the quickest way to get that, if they wait for it to come in the mail, it's going to take forever. The quickest way to do that is through your My Social Security account. In the past, when I was an idiot, I used to tell people, go to your My Medicare account. But, to get into your My Medicare account, you need your Medicare ID. So that doesn't work. So if they're looking to get their Medicare ID quickly, after they apply within a week or two, their Medicare ID, the first place they'll be able to get it is on their My Social Security account. So they can sign up. They don't have to draw Social Security. They just register for the account, and they can get their Medicare ID out of there way quicker than it'll ever come in the mail. I think that's what we have. There's a lot of good questions, actually. That tested me. It kind of bothers me. I'm drawing a blank on the HSA contribution towards supplement or MAPD premiums. My initial reaction is to say yes, that's an eligible expense, but I don't feel super confident about that for some reason. If you want to follow up with us, I can get that answer very easily, though, if you want to follow up. It looks like that's all the questions. Those are great questions, by the way. I really, I don't like being, racking my brain that hard. I do appreciate the questions coming in, so that was good. We have one more. Let's see. You mentioned that health insurance companies are beginning to deny claims. How many insurance companies at lower support levels are telling 65 or older employers they are fine on small group plans? I'm not sure about that answer. How many are doing that? I'm not sure how many are saying that to people. But I just know that a lot of agents still and a lot of people that are actively working, getting coverage through work for a group of less than 20 are still deferring B, not taking it. And that's where then when they have a big claim, if they don't have any big claims, it's no issue. But there's some level of claim that's triggering from the carriers to say, we're not covering this portion of this claim because Medicare should be covering that, and you don't have it in place. Looks like that's all we have for questions. It was a really good Q&A. I appreciate all the great questions. And thanks for coming on today. We will send this recording out to everybody. I had a couple of people ask if they could have a copy of the slides. Certainly just call us up and we'll send it over to you. No problem at all. I'll make sure that Lisa and Teal here in the office have it. And other than that, I hope everybody has a great weekend. And we'll send email notices out about our topics for next week. I think one of them will be the CMS max allowable commissions for 2023 are out, so we'll probably do just a quick one on that. And then maybe something on our new product that is the combo hospital indemnity, cancer, accident, critical illness, again with the notable thing being it's approved in all 50 states. So thanks. Appreciate you coming on today and hope everybody has a great weekend. Thank you.